Hello and welcome back. This is going to be a follow-on video to the account survey questions we did a couple of weeks back. If I just recap by going to the settings, what we did was set up the survey profiles with a number of questions related. So if you cast your minds back, we did this, well I did, I don't know if you've done the same, this survey about cars, and that had a couple of questions: favourite colour and a petrol or diesel or LPG, and then that survey would be selected by one or more accounts, and then a plugin on the change of survey or create of an account would copy all of those questions to a survey response entity. So if I click on the accounts relationship, pick the single account in this instance that's related to that particular survey, and if I scroll down we can see this was their copy of the responses that we were working with, and there was a second part to that when you modified any of the questions or added to or deleted a question from that particular survey profile, it would propagate through all associated accounts to that survey profile and update the questions or remove them, and so on and so forth. So this next part, there was a request to try and filter the questions based on criteria. I've spent probably around about just over a day and a half over the last week. It's been a bit difficult because I've been very busy at work, so difficult to find the time. But I've created this survey filters entity. I'll delete this one I was testing the other day. And what all this is like a parent container to relate the questions and the filter rules. Obviously at the moment I've done this in CRM 2011, but this is probably going to be my last video within CRM 2011, because I get the impression that the majority of people that are watching, you guys that are subscribing, seem to be CRM 2013 users. Obviously, if you want to fire a response at the end in the comments beneath the video, just to state whether it's CRM 2011 or 2013 and whether you're online or on premise, so I can get a bit of a feel for the numbers of users on each. That would be quite useful. But I've created this survey filters entity. So if I click a new, it only contains a name, which is just a description of what this particular parent filter is going to be. So I could say, as you saw on the sample data I put in, filter for survey about cars. I mean, this could be anything you like, and it's up to you. I mean, you could say something like filter for age, and it could relate to any question in multiple surveys so it doesn't relate directly to the survey profile, it relates to the questions themselves. So it could be a question from the dog survey and a question from the cars survey, all under one filter. But obviously I'm not going to tell you how to use it in your personal circumstances, but for my example I'm going to sort of stick to a survey filter per survey, so that any car questions I want to filter I can keep in there and create the rules, and any ones for, say, the dogs survey I could put into a different filter. But I say it's up to you. So if I now save that, obviously it's activated the associated areas now. I can click on questions, and then this is a many-to-many, because a question could relate to many survey filters, and many survey filters could relate to many questions. So created a many-to-many. Now I can pick one or more questions. So in this instance we're talking about a filter for the survey about cars, so I could just pick one of the questions. So the favourite colour, I could add that, so that's now associated to this filter. And then this is where I've done quite a bit of work on the JavaScript and so on, is on this rules entity. So what you can see is on the associated view, it's just got a field name on a particular entity and an operator and a value, and it will be a bit clearer if I click on the add new create rule. So it starts by, obviously these, if you look there, they're disabled to begin with, the entity and field selection. And now you can see, if you can see that change on the video, the entity has become enabled. So what that did, which I'll show you the JavaScript in Visual Studio in a second, on form load, it goes away and retrieves all of the entities in the system into an option set. So it dynamically fills this option set with all of the active entities in your customized, in the whole solution. Really, it's not specific to any one solution. So anything in the default solution that's an entity, and then if I were to pick, for example, the account, which is what all of these rules will be regarding, it goes away and retrieves. So then now that field selection's become enabled, so it's done a metadata retrieve of all of the fields on that account entity. So I've now got another dynamic option set that contains, so we can see, going back to some early videos, we've got the survey profiles from the previous video, these service A and so on. So you can see these custom fields, all of the standard sort of fields you'd expect on the account, and I can select any one of those, and based on the sort of data type, it only, well, I'll show you. If it's a string based, obviously it just does a value field for you to type in the value. Likewise, dates, money, and so on, they all just put a value field, so there's no intelligence regarding things like dates. Don't present you with a date picker, because I just haven't had the time to basically complete the code as much as I would, obviously, if it was a production solution. But obviously it's a work in progress, and you guys are all welcome to have the source code, and I'll post a link to that to continue the work on it. But if I show you, so if I picked address one city, it just puts a value field, and I could type in a value. I've got this operator field, which is based on the standard operators for a query expression. So when you're setting up a condition expression to filter your data, there's a standard set of operators, which is quite a big long list. I think there's about 45. And again, there's no real intelligence behind this. So if you were to say address one city, you could do something stupid like greater than, and I have no idea what a query expression would do if you put that as a condition, that address one city is greater than London, because it's a string, and I don't know if you're able to do comparisons with greater than on a string field. So there's no intelligence in terms of you putting, like, say, last week would just give you, well, probably throw an exception, I would imagine. So it relies on you having a little bit of common sense when picking the operator. So you could do things like the address on city equals London or not equal to London. Things like contains, I think, is lower down. Ends with, all these would be applicable to strings. But it gives you the power of the sort of standard advanced find, and what you can do in terms of, if you'd chosen a date field, you could probably say last X weeks, and obviously put a number in that value field, and then I'll show you the code later on, that would dynamically build the query expression with the conditions based on all of the rules you've added to the filter. So I mean, for this example, we'll just say that this question would only be added to the survey responses if the account's address one city was equal to London. And then if I save and close, you can see it's added that rule. If you wanted additional rules, the rules will all be ands. So if you add more than one rule, all of them have to be true. You don't have the facility to say that these are optional. I guess you could build some logic into the so you could put I don't know, maybe an and or an or, but it would be global for all of those rules then. So if you chose or at the survey filter level, any one of them could be true. And I guess if you changed it to and, this is what the default behavior for mine is, that all of the rules have to be true. So I could add an additional one. Obviously, again, it does a metadata query of the entities. When I select one, it does a metadata query of the fields on that entity. So there's a slight delay, so it's not ideal, but it does give you quite a bit of power in terms of defining the rules without having to rely on users knowing all the field names and typing them all into just strings. If I choose something like primary contact ID, which is a lookup, it actually builds a dynamic lookup, which is just a hidden field on the form. I'll show you that shortly. That is dynamically is bound to the contact entity, so I can actually pick a particular contact that it must equal or not equal. Again, I could change that to parent customer, or parent account, sorry, and that's dynamically changed the lookup to look at the accounts records. Pick lists as well, it does a dynamic pick list, so if I chose something like industry code, it changes to a pick list and it's dynamically populated with all of those options. Let's change it to a, I think, address one type code. Again, is another standard field, so it's got those 4 options for shipping addresses and so on. So you can see how you could build up some criteria. So I know people are talking about age filters on books, questionnaires and so on, but obviously you might need to either base it on the date of birth, but if you wanted to say greater than or less than age, you might have to create a custom age field and have some code that calculates their age on a daily basis, because obviously each day they could potentially be 1 year older. But again, that's down to you for how to utilise. One thing I haven't done is, obviously this has been developed in 2011, and when I show you the JavaScript in a second, you'll see it does use, I think, some unsupported methods. I believe I'll check that, but I haven't actually took this into a 2013 environment to see that all my JavaScript is functional. So hopefully it will be functional, but obviously if you do get any issues, we'll try and obviously resolve them through either the Google Plus, or you can go on the forum or on the thread for the video. I'll quickly show you the form design. So as you can see, those are the entity selector, the field selection, the operator field, and then there's these 3 sections, one for the value field, one for lookup, one for pick list, so that I can hide them on demand or show them on demand, and you'll just see the relevant field for that type, and you'll see that in the JavaScript. So that's, and then underneath, obviously this is what I need to store, because these are not bound to any one particular lookup or any particular pick list. I mean, that is it's just an account lookup by default, but obviously if I bind it to something else in the JavaScript and set the source entity type to something else, I need a means then, because if you save the record, that lookup, if you bound it to something dynamically runtime in the client-side code, wouldn't store the value. It wouldn't store anything in there. It would store an account because it's natively an account lookup, but any other entity type. So if it was the primary contact, you'd done a filter for. I need to store the values down in these internal use fields, which at the moment I've got displayed, but probably in production you'd hide this away, this whole section, and just give the end users or the power users the just those top fields for defining the rules. You can see when I actually modify rule, you probably saw these changing. So if I'd chosen a lookup, something like yes, so yeah, the parent account again, so, or parent contact, sorry, parent contact, it's bound to the contact lookup, pick one, you see it populates the description and the target entity type, and that's used. If I save and close that, so you can see, because it's storing the GUID in the hidden value field, and when I revisit this, because it has to retrieve all the metadata before it can obviously enable these fields, and then it dynamically builds the lookup, it reads it in from this information over here. So I'll go through the JavaScript now of how that functions. So let me just save and close again. So I'll probably, for now, I'll delete that rule, and we can come back and add some when we look at the other code for the when we modify the survey profile. So I'll just delete that one and leave the address 1 city equals London. So if I go across to Visual Studio, open my demo solution, take a few seconds. Okay, so I've got this JavaScript library which has got various functions, the first of which that gets called on the form load is this retrieve entities function. And what that starts off with is it's actually hiding the value field. I was getting some weird behavior where I don't know if it's something that's got messed up with my particular organization, but the value field was refusing to hide the section, that is. It was just always visible, even if I ran a set visible false. But so finally, it's tripped into life. I think by adding that operator field seems to have made it actually start functioning again. But anyway, you probably wouldn't need that bit because yours will probably be hidden if you choose it to be visible by default false by unticking the box on the form designer. It should hopefully function normally, but something going strange with my organisation. So what it does in that early if statement is basically look in those. Oh, one thing before I go on, you'll notice just to confuse issues, whereas I was using an FSO prefix before, I've introduced my own prefix, which is obviously a abbreviation of Steve Green, so it's Steg. So yeah, don't get confused suddenly by wondering what the hell steg underscore is when you've been seeing FSO, and obviously your guys will be your own or new underscore. But yeah, so you're going to see a bit of a mishmash because the previous video was done using FSO underscore prefixes, and I've now introduced my own publisher. That's just to explain why you're going to see these different prefixes. But yeah, this early if, what that's doing is basically taking the bottom part of what's in here. So if you're reopening a rule, because it takes a few seconds to retrieve the metadata, and when it retrieves the entity metadata, if then you've pre-selected an option, it then instantly goes off and runs the method for retrieving the field metadata. And then obviously that takes a few seconds again to retrieve that before it then runs the JavaScript that presents the relevant value lookup pick list field. So when the user first opens it, I didn't want them wondering what the hell's going on. So if I reopen this, I didn't want them having blank fields here instantly and wondering what the hell's going on because they've just opened an existing rule. So I basically take the values that were pre-stored down here and create a single value for the option set. So that's this option equals new object. I take what's stored in those bottom, so what's down here. So if you read it, it's got the entity type code, which is 1, and the entity description, which is obviously in this instance account. And I build obviously this new option that so the value's that and the text is that, and then I add that option to the picklet to the pick list. So it's basically got a single entry the moment the form's loaded. So this, instead of having all of the options, because it's just that's a blank pick list and that's a blank pick list, it adds a single option in for what you previously selected. So the moment the user first opens it, they can see their previous selection. They've still got a delay and the field's disabled whilst in the background it's asynchronously retrieving the metadata. But I just thought it's a little bit more user friendly that they can see their options, and then okay, they've got to wait 5 to 10 seconds for all the metadata queries to go on. But so that's what these early pieces of code, both for the entity drop down and the field drop down. Hopefully that's making sense. So I had a couple of comments regarding that statement, so if you can sit up at the back. Then we set the value section visible to false. Again, this is again a fallback to my form not working properly, so again you can probably abandon that, both those two lines, this one up here and that, because you should be able to, hopefully on your forms, just set them to default, visible by default false, and they'll just do what you've asked. But anyway, and then I'm using a toolkit off Codeplex, this XRM service toolkit, which gives you various SOAP and REST methods, and obviously CRUD, create, retrieve, update, deletes, and associate, disassociates can be done with the REST endpoint. Other types of message, so any sort of metadata queries and so on, have to be done with SOAP messages, but this gives you a nice method that handles all the SOAP envelope, and you don't have to look at a massive big SOAP message type, and obviously they're quite complicated to look at. They're horrible to try and build manually. So this gives you this retrieve all entities metadata method. I think that's a filter on the type of entities to bring back. I'd have to look at the documentation what the true flag was for. I can't remember now. It was a couple of weeks ago. And then this is the callback method. So when this method finishes retrieving the data asynchronously, I think that actually that true might be whether to do async or synchronous, true or false. Obviously we don't want to freeze the form by doing it synchronously, because the user might think the browser's crashed or something. So best to go asynchronous. And this is just the successful callback method, which you can see just underneath. So it basically calls into this method when this is finished in the background, retrieving the metadata. And there's obviously a single attribute, which I've just called results, but you can call that what you like, and it basically passes the retrieved information into this results parameter, which you can then check in the later JavaScript if it's actually retrieved anything successfully, if it contains anything at all. Again, I've done this set visible false, trying to desperately hide that value field so that the form, which if I show you again, actually seems to be sorted out now. So if I double click that, originally my value field was there and I couldn't get the thing to hide until later in the JavaScript when it had done a bit of metadata retrieval. Then it would hide, but it looked a bit stupid that it was there to start with and then vanished. But anyway, it seems to have sorted itself out now. But back to the JavaScript. So it's done the metadata retrieval entities metadata method. Retrieved. They've called back into this entity results. I check to see if it's not null. Set up options array. I've got this, I think by doing it without the var, it's a global variable, so that would then be available outside of the entity results. So the var options would live and die within this function. So if it falls out of scope at the end of the brace, var options is gone. It's deleted from memory, but the entities array is available for other methods to interact with and query. So that I then iterate through the results, obviously I had to do a bit of analysis of doing some breakpoints and stepping into the code with a debugger. The display name of the values that have come back, there's this localized labels that's an array. I think if you're using more than one language you'd have more than one in the array, but I'm just using English. So this 0th index of the localized labels collection of that result, so it's basically the label of the of the entity names, and I've chosen whether it's a customizable one because I didn't want all the hidden system values in there as well. So if it is a customizable, so when you look at your solution, if I customize just any entity for now, just to show you, you've got filters on when you click on the fields. This is showing what is customizable and custom and so on. You've got these fields, so certain things won't be customizable. Certain things like created by and on are probably system protected. So if I chose customizable, tell a lie, they are there. But certain ones will have disappeared off there because you can't modify them and customize their behavior and display names and so on. And that's all I'm doing with the entity labels. So I only want entities that are customizable by the user, i.e. should hopefully include the system entities and any custom ones you've done. I then create an option object, which is just a standard JavaScript object, so you can add properties dynamically, this entity object as well. Basically, from that particular entity, obviously because I'm iterating through, this I is going to increment at each record. It's going to start at 0, I believe, and increment through, but obviously it's just a means of me storing the results and what their text value is. So that the type code is things like an accounts 1, contacts 2, custom ones are up in the, I think, 10,000s, or I think they start at 10,000 upwards. So when you create a new entity, the first one you create will be 10,000, and then the next one 10,001. But there is a list online. If you do entity type codes, you'll see a list of all the Microsoft standard ones on a TechNet article. I then take the localized label and the label property and store it in the text. So what that equates to is, if I look at the rule, basically each of these in the drop down, once this has finished the metadata retrieval, although you only see the account, the actual text there, each one of them, so you've got the value will be 1 for account, no idea what activity is, contact would be 2, and so on. So it gives me a means of storing them on that sort of protected area down here, so that entity type code. If I pick contact, you'll see it's changed to 2, and it's gone off to retrieve the fields for the contact entity. So it's just a way of me storing these, but at the moment I'm storing them into an array. So I iterate through all the results, take the value in the text, push them into this options array. That's what that pushes. It's like a .add in C#. Also into this entities array, that's the global one, I'm also storing this object type code. And obviously because options going to be targeting the pick list, it has to have this lowercase .value and .text when you actually bind it to the control on the CRM form, because you've got these XOM page, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you've got these clear options and add option, and these are standard methods in the SDK, which I can show you if we dive into wherever I've got mine on my D drive. So in the help file, if I expand it out and look for the right client application extensions, and then you've got your client-side programming reference, you should see on the, I can't remember which one it is now, it's probably going to be UI, yeah, there you go, so xrm.page.ui, you've got this add option method, clear options to clear all, which is what I've utilized in this JavaScript, so minimize those. So yeah, I'm basically, because when you add an option, if you look at the syntax within here, it tells you it has to have a certain format of the dot value. I think there's some sample stuff. But basically, yeah, you have to have a dot value and a dot text. Can't find it, but trust me on that one. It's that's the format, and then when you add the option to the array, and I bind the array later on, it's basically adds, well, you have to have an index and and so on, and a value to it. So then also I'm storing in the entity array this object type code, because these are new objects. I can add whatever I like. JavaScript's quite good in that respect, that doesn't have to be predefined. I can just do this dot object type code, which is something I can make up. I can call that dot thread, and I can add what I like to this object. So I've added the object type code and the logical name of the entity, which I later use to query that entity array to look things up when I'm doing the future queries. So then, after I've iterated through all of them and built this option list, I wanted them to be alphabetical order. So I've done this options.sort, and I've written a custom compare method. Because these are objects, not a single set of if it was a single collection of, like, a list of strings or a bunch of integers in an array, you just need to use the standard sort, and it would sort them in ascending order. But because these are objects, and I wish to work on one of either the text or the value property, I needed to write this little function compare here, which basically takes the two values, does a compare, and obviously if they're less than, it returns -1. If they're greater than, returns 1, and if they're equal, otherwise it returns 0. So, and by that, then the standard JavaScript sort method uses that custom compare and the .text property of each to basically sort them into alphabetical order, because the query, the retrieval, the metadata, wouldn't have done them in any particular order. They could have come back in random letter order, so it just means it looks a little bit tidier that they're ascending alphabetical order, because you could remove that option sort and see the difference and see that they're all over the show. So once I've sorted that, I basically clear the options so that the single option we defined when it's a reopened rule, obviously it's a brand new one, this doesn't really matter because there aren't any options, but if we've reopened an existing rule, you saw the earlier JavaScript where I dynamically build an option for each and just take a previous value just until the metadata has retrieved all the options for us. So it's just a means of clearing that down, the single option I've added, before I populate it with the ones we've iterated over and built the collections of. So just clears the options, then I go through that array we've previously populated, and basically that control, use the add option, take obviously the index and the value, sorry, the count, sorry, I just populate them in ascending order, so we're starting at 0 in the options collection. I basically take the value from that position in the options array and just take, so that'll be the 0th position in options and the 0th index in the drop down list, number 1, number 2, so on and so on. And that then gives you a drop down list of options in a pick list. The same for entity type code. Yeah, so what this next section of code's doing, because if they open an existing rule, we need to find, so we've cleared the whole list of entities. I don't want them, if they previously selected account or contact, which is way down the list, if I clear the options, it will default them back to either nothing selected or the first option in the list. So this is where I'm using an unsupported method, which I haven't confirmed whether this is going to work in 2013, because I've read a few bits about using the document object model and this get element by ID that it's supposed to break, but I haven't tested that yet. So this is basically targeting the DOM of the browser object, so it's Microsoft don't obviously say don't do it, but it's not supported, and obviously when they change versions and roll-ups this could break, but it's the easiest way for me to get that field object to be able to query the index and the entity type. So I'm getting the entity drop down, this steg entity, which is this field, into this var entity. I'm then using this $.grep method, which is basically like a where in the link provider and so on. Let's bring up a browser and have a look at. It's basically a way of searching within an array. Should put grep JavaScript or something. It's a jQuery method. So it just basically queries the existing array and apply, and obviously with your criteria, and returns a collection of results. So it removes the items that, so it just leaves the remaining items in an array that fit your criteria. So hopefully you understood that. So my entities appear array is what I'm targeting. Oh, sorry. No, it's the entity child node. It's the options of my entity drop down. Sorry, I'm querying. Then there's this function. I'm basically asking it to return the value into this. Obviously, this is just not an anonymous type. This is just a on-the-fly function. So I'm basically looking for the value field. As I said, those option sets have what you can see up here is a value and a text. So I'm looking for where the entity type code previously selected. So down here, I'm basically asking it to find in that list where the entity type code. So if that said 2, find in that list, in this drop down, find where the type code equals 2, where the value is 2. And what that does then, of returning the results into this index, taking the first result, and I want to know what position on that drop down that exists at, and then I just set that to that selected index. So hopefully that makes some sense. So on this list of whatever there is in there, for argument's sake there's 50, if down here this said 4012 and whatever entity that equates to, let's have a quick Google for entity type codes. So we should find a standard list of, so for example it said 4200. If that down there said 4200, that line queries that list where the value that you can't see, it's a hidden property of the drop down, because you know in CRM that pick lists have a text value that you see, and then if you go into the customization area you can see they have an integer value. So that has, or any pick list has those hidden values behind the scenes that get stored in the database. So I've just written a little one-line grep jQuery method that goes away and says if this said 4200, what number in that array in that option set is it? Find it and then select that option, so that we basically for pre-existing rules we jump to the correct one after this has dynamically populated the list. So hopefully that does make some sense. It's more complicated than it actually looks. I then set because that's then populated and selected the correct index, I can now make that field selectable, so they could change the entity type. And the field name, if it's also not null, so if it's a pre-existing rule and they've already picked an option in it, I also then do this retrieve entity metadata method, and what that does is retrieves the fields. So I probably could have done a slightly better wording of the name, so I could have said retrieve field metadata or something, but it's basically for the selected entity. So it's now had one highlighted with a type code, selected the correct index, so now we've selected account or contact, calls this retrieve entity metadata, which is just a single one line. Again, it's using this Codeplex XRM service toolkit. Oh, nearly saved that. So XRM service toolkit, which you can see on Codeplex, which you can download, works for 2013 as well, and just gives you some REST methods, SOAP methods. I think you can go to the documentation area and get some sample documentation on the SOAP functions and so on. So yeah, execute, get current is all these various methods that are included in it, and somewhere down amongst it is going to be the retrieve entity metadata. Somewhere was that the REST method? Sorry, that was the REST method. So SOAP, yeah. Anyway, in that documentation somewhere, I don't know if it's on the discussions or in the downloads, there's documentation. They explain these, but again, this is now not retrieving all entity metadata. This is for the specific entity selected on the drop down. I retrieve the attributes from it, which is what I want to populate the field with. So, and then the attributes, obviously the filter for it, I'm using the selected entity logical name. So down here, so they've picked account. Obviously you have to pass it a logical name, so I've stored this account logical name in a field. That's what I pass in. True again is the async synchronous option. This is our callback function. So when this finishes in the background, retrieving all the fields, it jumps into this entity metadata results. Again, very similar, passes a single parameter which is a collection of all the results. I check if it's not null, i.e. it's been successful, or it contains some fields. Create a fields array, an options array, iterate through, populating the fields with the logical name of each field. Do a standard sort because all that contains is a string of the logical name. Then I go through all those fields, create a new option object, again taking the array, i.e. starts at 0 for the first field and goes all the way to the end, populates the value with that, populates the text to be from the fields in that position. So we've got a list of matching fields, and I can pull the logical name out and then adds them to that option array. Then I clear the field selection. So this had a single value added in on a update when I open an existing record. Just make sure they're back to no options in there. Iterates through, adding each option in, and again does a similar query where it finds the index position for the selected field if it's a pre-existing rule. And then there's one final for the particular attribute that we've just chosen. So when we pick from this list, if I pick city, there's a JavaScript query which is this retrieve attribute metadata, which again is part of that XRM service toolkit. And all that does is goes around and gets information about the particular field, which calls back. So that's the entity. So again, we're using values from, so we've picked from the account, so we pass in the target entity, because you saw these were like strings up here. So that would have said speech marks, account, but we can dynamically pass that in. The target field we're looking for, so the attribute we're looking for the metadata on, let me scroll down a bit. The attribute we're looking for the metadata on is the one we've just selected, async or not, and then a callback method for when it completes. So then again, it's very similar again, check if it's null, and then look for the attribute type to see if it's a lookup. There's obviously these certain ones like customer for these multi-party lookups that, multi-entity lookups that Microsoft are allowed to use that we're not. We can't create one that targets multiple entities out the box. So on things like an opportunity, when you click on customer, it can be a contact or an account or various like that. That's that customer type lookup, owner and so on, and pick list and a status. But based on what type it is, I either set the value section visible, so if it's a date, time and all these other types I haven't really handled yet, I haven't built this further. If it's a lookup or a customer or an owner, I use this dynamic lookup method that I've written, and then it targets the entity type. So if I show you the method, so the dynamic lookup, so what's this going to do is this will make visible this lookup section and then modify what that lookup targets in code. So I target the particular lookup, which is the field we're passing in. So this is the field name, steg lookup. So I target that with an unsupported method again. And when I say unsupported, don't be scared of using unsupported methods. Just be prepared that if rollup 2 for CRM 2013 comes out and you're using an unsupported method and it stops working, that's sort of your problem. You've got to find out why it stopped working. That's all Microsoft are saying by unsupported methods. And you can't go and phone up for tech support on your partner hours or whatever, or paid support. Well, you can probably pay for support because they'll happily take your money. But if you phone up with like business critical support or try and use your partner hours, if you're a gold partner or silver partner, and say I've got 50 hours to use, I want to speak to one of your CRM experts, and you suddenly start mentioning you've got using document get element by ID, they'll probably finish the call quite quickly and tell you you're kind of on your own because you're not using the XRM page syntax. But I couldn't find a way to do it without directly targeting the element, but hopefully one of you guys can and feed it back to me. But so anyway, I read in the field element various like type icons and various variables are set up. I then iterate through each type code in that field. Yeah, so the type code I pass in, I could ask it to target more than one. So if I wanted it to be a lookup to a contact, an account and a contact, I could pass in more than one entity type. I mean, at the moment you can see I'm just doing a single, the 0th position of the result of the metadata. But I could target more than one. So if I wanted it to be 2 different entity types, but anyway, that's what it then just iterates through. Does this jQuery, looks up in the entities that was that global collection you saw higher up, because that's now, which was right back up here, this entities array, because I didn't define it with var, it's global, so I can then query it back down here in this dynamic lookup to find the logical name. So if obviously we've passed in that we've picked number entity type code 1, I want to know what the name of that entity is, which I need when I define the lookup type names. So if that retrieves the entity name, so it goes away and finds what's number 1 or number 2, and it comes back with the contact or account into this entity name here. If it's the first, so if this was multiple, I'm targeting more than one entity. Obviously, if it's the first one, I can add on after the logical name the object type code and logical name, and that's the lookup type name. If you define it in JavaScript, it's just say account : 1 : and then the entity. So I think it's account : 1 : account, but don't know if you actually need that bit. It seems to work. What you see here is this lookup type icons. I call this getIcon URL method. So for particular entity, so when you select in a lookup, so close that. If I change this to primary contact and I pick one, you can see it's got the icon in front of it, but you have to define for this lookup, because it's dynamically being bound to contacts, you have to define the lookup type icons property, and I've got this method that I got off the internet. So this is not my own work, but I think if you do a search for getIcons in JavaScript, right down here, you'll probably find this example all over the internet, on Coplex and so on. You basically pass it the type code, this etc entity type code. So if it's a system one, anything i.e. less than 10,000, so 1 or all the ones we saw on that entity type code list that I've now closed, they're all in a standard images folder, just with ico _16_ and then the entity type code and a .gif or GIF on the end. So account would just be ico _16_1. If you were to put that, obviously preceding your URL for your organization, you would see the little 16 by 16 icon file for the entity you've selected, but the custom ones are supposedly stored in this common location on the web server, and there's this icon ASPX page that you can query and pass in this, but at the moment mine doesn't seem to be working. I have had it working, but I don't know I've tried it with uppercase and lowercase, because if I look at the actual web service, because I'm on premise, it's got a lowercase c, but the guides online say uppercase. But anyway, someone may spot an obvious mistake and be able to tell me. But obviously, if I choose a custom entity, it should show the types. If I say my FSO survey profile, it's bound now to my survey profiles entity, but I'm getting this blank placeholder because it can't find my icon, and I haven't had the time to really troubleshoot it. But so that's a slight flaw that's in there you guys should be aware of. But anyway, back up to here. So yeah, that basically goes off. Am I on the right? Sorry, that's dynamic pick list. Dynamic lookup. So sets the icon to the right URL for the icon, sets the types to be your type code, and then the type names if you want it to be multiple. Then sets that. Obviously, this is where the document, I'm targeting the DOM because you can't do this in the XRM page model. So I set this lookup type names property of this object to be these various values, and set the default type to be the first of the ones. So if it's multiple, so if it was account and contact, I'm just defaulting it to the first one of those, so it'd be the account. And then what's my code? Set lookup entity.getValue. Yeah, so this next bit is if it's a pre-selected value. So if I'd not that one, sorry. Just open that rule. So if this was a pre-selected lookup, so if I just quickly retrieve the metadata. So if I'd chosen primary contact and chosen Mr. Babington and save and close, when I reopen it and it detects it's a lookup type for the field that's selected, and it does a check if these values down here are already, so much like we did when we had pre-selected one of these, we wanted to pick the right index. If we'd pre-selected a value, so this primary contact ID, obviously this, when it's bound, is blank. It's not a selected value because it can't save it in the database because it doesn't really exist connected to contacts. So I'm storing the value down here in lookup entity contact and lookup description, the individual record. So I then have to do this code that basically sets the values of that to equal. So the ID is the value field that's hidden. So when I display a lookup or a pick list, I hide the value field, which actually contains the GUID to A Babington. And obviously, if it's just a date, time, or string, you see the value field, and that's when you saw in the list of results. So let me just save that, and you'll see the value on here. So that's what's getting stored in the value field is the GUID. So I basically take the GUID, set this lookup ref. So the GUID's from the value field. The description is the name of the person, so A Babington, and the entity it's targeting is contact on these lower internal use fields. So there's the entity contact. Set this lookup ref object. Obviously, when you do a lookup, you have to have an object in an array, and it's obviously a single lookup is just the 0th array. And that's what I'll do, is set the 0th first index of this array to be this ref object, and then just set the value, and that's how you set a lookup in JavaScript anyway, which probably a lot of you would know. If not, hopefully that wasn't too rushed. And then I hide the relevant section, so I make the lookup, because this is a lookup code, this was the dynamic lookup method, set that visible to true and set the other two to false. So we see the lookup, we don't see the value section, we don't see the pick list. And I make the lookup, the control, not disabled anymore. Then in a very similar vein, if up here it had been a pick list, I've got this dynamic pick list method. I'll quickly go over this, but you can have the source code. It's virtually identical in functionality, except it populates the options within the pick list from this retrieve attribute metadata, retrieves the pick list's attribute info, and goes through all the options that are part of the result. So it comes back, it's got this, daisy. It's got this option set property, and it's got options collection within it. I iterate through all of those and basically populate the text to be this label, user localized label dot label, which looks a bit long-winded, and then the value, add them to the options array, clear the options in the existing list. So if I change from one option set type to another, so Let's choose industry code. Gets populated dynamically with a bunch of options for the industry code. If I then change to address one type code, it clears the options and populates with the new ones. So that's all that is doing there, and adds the options in. Similar jQuery method to find the selected value if it's pre-chosen, and then hides the sections and so on. Then just to quickly pass over these, if you change the field, obviously it does a bunch of cleaning up and hiding of stuff and so on, and then calls the entity metadata. So that's all that's really doing, and setting submit modes so that they are considered, so they get saved to the database. So things like the hidden these internal use fields, if you change them in JavaScript, as you might have seen in one of my other videos, you might not all have watched it, but if you change a value in client-side code, it's not considered changed by the form. You have to say that it's marked as dirty. So when you click save, it overwrites stuff you've modified. Obviously, if you change the field, you don't want it to retain information in pick list if this is no longer pick list, because it would cause misleading results. So that's all that's doing really, and the same with the field selection. It does a bunch of cleanups. If the lookup changes, so if you change the value within the lookup, again just a bit of cleanup and searching. Likewise the pick list change, and that completes the JavaScript. I think the only other thing, on a save, it clears anything selected in the lookup, just in case you've chosen an account or something, just so we know that the form is saved with clean values in the lookups and so on. So that's the JavaScript, which builds this sort of functionality. Obviously it could do with extending to probably handle date times and give you a date time picker. I just haven't had the time this week to do it. I mean, I may do a future version of it and complete it. Likewise, this operator hasn't got any intelligence, so you can go and choose something ridiculous. Like I said before, like the on or after, and it could be a pick list, and I'm pretty certain that'll throw an exception in the code for the building of the query in C# in the plugin and that. So anyway, that's the rules element. Obviously this video is up to nearly an hour now. I'll carry it on. Obviously it's going to be quite a monstrous video, probably one of the biggest I've done. So that's the rules. If I leave that, I'll change that back to the City London that we did. So let the metadata retrieve. So it's just retrieving the field info, and it's read in the previously stored value. So if we go back to address one, city, it's set to equal, and we can put London in, and I'll just save that. So now we've got our details stored, and obviously our value will, when again, obviously because we've saved, it's refreshed the form, and it's got to do the whole which is what, it's not ideal, but I think it's a lot more sophisticated than if you were to just have a bunch of string fields and ask them for the entity and the field selection. They could mistype it, and they'd have to know what the account entity contained, and so on and so forth. I haven't tested it if someone was to go and delete a field. So if you'd chosen a custom field and you'd selected it in a rule, and then someone deleted the field and published the changes, and then you came back to the rule, I don't know what would happen. Might need to also do a bit of handling for that, but anyway, so if I save that London rule, what I've now done, if I go to the survey question, that's the workflow. Let me just minimize. So our post account update, that was the one we did for when they either create an account, which you can see this registered events ad here. If they create an account or update, we had this plugin that, so if I go to our workplace and accounts, we'd written a plugin that if they change the survey or on a creative account when they first populate it, we had a plugin triggering on the update on the change of that, or the create. Obviously triggers on everything, but was then populating the questions. So I could change that to survey about cars, and this plugin will trigger. All I've done at the moment is added logic to the plugin. I haven't had the time to update the workflow. That so someone goes and changes a question, it's not going to read the rules in. So what I've done lower down, so it's only on the plugin at present. So again, I haven't had the time, but it's something you guys could work on in your own time as a bit of a challenge. Or hopefully I'll get it completed in the next week or so, but I'm trying to get as much of my content for the developer training kit done, because there's going to be a huge amount of footage. But anywho, so in the when it so if you remember back, if it's blank, if you blank the survey profile, obviously it went through and deleted all the questions, this delete object, and then saves the changes. If they don't blank, obviously it won't go into that section and return. It will hit this latter bit of code where it queries the survey response selected for that account, deletes all the old questions, because you've changed the survey response from one type to another, so the other questions won't be applicable. Then it queries the questions for the chosen survey profile for this account. So this account survey profile, go and get me all of the questions that are on that survey profile. Then for each question, what it was doing before was just this bit. It'd add a new response where it'd associate it to that account, enter the question text and relate it to the source question for the workflow to work with for modification. But I've added this if condition and this verify question method, which if I scroll down, let me just make that a bit narrower. So we've got this verify question method. So what this is doing, I'm instantiating the organizer. Well, let me start at the start. I'm passing in. So we've got in this iterative loop of all the questions. Each question I need to check whether it passes the rules, whether it's allowed to be added to the survey responses. So we've got a single rule at the moment where the city has to equal London. So on the single question we've chosen that for, I think was I can't remember now. Favourite colour. So on the survey about cars, favourite colour has got a criteria that the city has to equal London. Obviously that's a ridiculous criteria, but you can obviously think of some real world examples. But anyway, it passes in the particular question, so it will go through the survey about cars, which has got 2 questions on it, iterate through each one and pass in each question into this verify question method along with the account that we've modified. So we've changed the profile on CRM demo account. This is the account that the plugin got triggered against. So we pass that in along with the organisation service. I instantiate the organisation service context. Then I'm looking for which filter. So on my custom entity, I need to know for that question which survey filter does it belong to. Obviously you'd have to be careful that you didn't have questions related to multiple, because my logic is only getting a single survey filter. I'm assuming you'll only add any one question will only be associated to a single survey filter record, if that makes sense. Obviously if you did, this logic would be flawed, so just be aware of that, because I'm assuming that you'll have a single survey filter, so filter for survey about cars, and a filter for survey about books, and a filter for survey about dogs, or whatever you've chosen to do. So I'm querying the many-to-many entity, because I said that the questions related to it are a many-to-many, so many questions can relate to many, but possibly it should have been done that there's a one-to-many, but anyway, I've done it as a many-to-many. Possibly someone can make this work with multiple survey filters. I just haven't tried to, given the timescales. But so I query my many-to-many entity where the question that we've passed in. So obviously that many-to-many will have just the survey filter ID and the question ID. So I should get a single row where for this question, so I can get the ID of this parent filter for survey back cars. So favourite colour, query the many-to-many for favourite colour, get the ID of the survey filter record. So if it's not null, i.e. the question does exist if the question doesn't exist on any survey filters, I can only assume you don't want to filter it out. So the question for, let me get my survey about cars, for the diesel and petrol question, that won't exist on a survey filter. So favourite colour will, petrol, diesel or LPG, won't exist on any of these survey filters, so this query would return null. So in that instance, because this verified questions are true false, it will return true. So it would come in, it would query the petrol, diesel, LPG question, the verified question will return true, so it'll pass into here and it'll create a new response on the account. If it's the question of the favourite colour question, obviously this return true would just be passed over the check. So I then want to retrieve all of the rules from my rule entity that are related to this. So any rules that are in here, there could be 1,000 possibly. I mean, whatever you like. If you're doing 1,000, you're quite picky about who can have your questions. But so it'll retrieve all these rules in this next link statement from the create rule set, where for the survey filter that we just retrieved up here. So for question favourite colours, it's on the filter for survey about cars. We've got the ID up here. So I'm going to get all the rules from that particular filter set. And then if there are no rules for that, again, I can only assume if there aren't any rules, although the question's associated to it, it's not going to be filtered out, so return true again. Otherwise, I create this list of conditions where I dynamically build a query expression. So I create a generic list called conditions for each rule that got retrieved. So in our instance, or my example, there's a single rule where the address 1 city equals London. So I then have to cast the operator. So what I did with the operator field, let me show you. Create rule. Oh, sorry, that's the fields for that. Let me close a few things down and just close down that demo account. Let me go to my customizations and my auto rules solution. Oops, sorry, didn't go to solutions. Bear with me. So let me go to my auto rules solution. So on my create rule, that field that the operator equal, the one that had the big list. So I've got this steg operator. I imported this using another utility off CodePlex, which is called this CRM Express Option Set Manager. And that's just got a little GUI you connect to your server, and it lets you from a CSV, which I've just got here. I did a CSV, I basically copied and pasted out of TechNet all the operators for a condition expression that had like equal is 0, not equal is 1, so on. These are in ascending order from 0 all the way through to, actually there's 74 of them, so you can see there's a lot. So in the code, this condition operator, so when you define your condition expression, you have to give a condition operator. So here, where I've started to define, let me take the breakpoints out, where I'm defining this new condition expression, you give an attribute name and you have to give a condition operator. And if you look at the definition of that, there's this enum in the metadata for this namespace, the SDK query namespace, and each of the values is there, so 1, 2, 3 and so on, which equate to my field. So the option set I've built, the global option set, equal is 0 and 1 and so on. So based on what they've chosen on the form, I can cast the value. So the operator, so if it said equal, it's got a value of 0, I cast that as a condition operator into this C operator variable I've set up. If the value's not null, because obviously it was things like I don't know if it's what's some of the operators. If I close that, if it was what have we got? If it was null or not null, those don't need a value. So the condition expression is just, so you could say I want to test where the primary contact is not null. So I could have chosen not null, but I wouldn't put anything in the value field on my form. So I'm just checking if the value doesn't have anything. If it doesn't have a value, do this section where you don't define the condition expression with the extra. So if I just do that again, you've got these overloaded methods. So you can have a condition expression with just an attribute name and a condition operator, i.e. the one below, so you haven't specified a value, or the one I've done above, there's the attribute name, the condition operator, and the value. So it's just a means of using a good chunk of the operators to make them applicable. But again, I haven't tested extensively all of those operators to see if they work. They should pass in and cast correctly, but what happens if you pass a date time in? I don't know. I haven't tried it. I've tried with pick lists and option sets and lookups, and it all seems to work okay. But that basically builds a condition expression and adds it to this list. So for every rule, if there were 5 rules, it would go through each rule, take the operator and the value, and build for the field selected a growing list of condition expressions. And then I add one final one, is because we obviously want to only make it applicable to the account that we've modified. So if in this instance CRM demo account's been changed, I need to say all the rules from the survey filter and for the account ID of the current record, which is CRM demo account. So I add that into the conditions collection as well. Then build a new query expression. Obviously if you were targeting a different entity for your surveys, then you wouldn't put account entity logical name, you'd put something else. But in this instance, my example was on the account entity. Someone, Brian, I think it was, wanted a survey doing for an account. So I then add this add range method for the conditions, just adds all of that in the list. And then for the column set, because all I care about here is whether it gives me one result or not, i.e. if the account that's being modified fulfills those criteria, i.e. the address 1 city is London, I will get a count of greater than 1. So I only care about returning just the GUID for the accounts, so that it's the minimum amount of data for the query. So it should hopefully, because some of you guys look like you're doing quite a lot of questions, like 20, 30 plus, which I think if you had some performance issues, but I think Saeed suggested obviously clearing or disabling other past plugins and that, but it's sort of down to you guys to look at what you've got registered on any one message type and obviously work with the amount of workload you're imposing on the platform. So if you've got 5 very expensive plugins that do a lot of work, there's a good chance you're going to hit your 2-minute timeouts. But anyway, this then will do a retrieve multiple with all of those criteria for the rules. If we don't get a result, those conditions weren't met for that question. So if the city wasn't London, this query expression would query the current account. So with the rule address 1 city is London, if obviously it doesn't return anything, we know that question shouldn't be added. And if it does, we return true, much like if there were no rules or there were no survey filters for the question, returns true, and the question's acceptable, and it will be added to the survey responses. As I say, I've only done that at the plugin level. I haven't gone into the survey question and down in the code where we go through, because obviously there might be a couple of bits we need to work on the logic. If they modify the questions, do you reread the rules? You probably should do, because obviously there's a section where it adds the questions if it doesn't find it exists already. But again, you could add the verify question bit in there as part of the workflow, but it's just what happens if you modify the existing questions, the wording. Possibly that question is no longer applicable. because the rules have been changed in the meantime. Also, if you change and add a rule to a survey and there's pre-existing accounts, you'd need a mechanism for going through existing accounts and again finding out whether you should remove questions and so on. So there is a chunk more work to be done, but I really just haven't had the time this week because I've been stacked out at work. But anyway, I'll show you now that I've obviously deployed that because I was testing the logic. So we've got, if I go back to the survey, filter for survey about cars, it's on the favourite colour question, and there's a rule that says the address one city must equal London. So if I go back to workplace, go to accounts and demo account, this is obviously currently chosen a survey about dogs. So if I now pick, let me just check, so city doesn't equal anything. So because the city doesn't equal London, the favourite colour question won't be valid. So if I save, it should trigger the plugin once it caches it. That delays because obviously I've powered this server up fresh when I loaded the plugin before. So we see there's only the petrol or diesel or LPG question. So if I just set this back to dogs, survey about dogs, save it, should have the dog questions come back in. So if I leave that on that, minimize it, go to my filters, or sorry, I'll leave the filter alone. Jump and let me just put London in the city. So just save that. Obviously I haven't changed the survey, so the plugin isn't going to check any rules about it because there's no filter on the dogs questions, and I haven't obviously changed that field, so it wouldn't trigger the plugin anyway. But now if I change the survey about cars, the favourite colours question, I should fulfil the criteria. So when I save this, the code that does the checking of the rules, see now we've got the extra favourite colour question. So I could go and change the filter. I could add multiple filters, so it had to be more than one, but that's for you guys to test. I have done it. It works fine. So I could change, I don't know, either to primary contact, must not equal or not equal to Mr. Babington. So save and close. Let me change. Oh, so yeah, it's already set to. So primary contact is set to A Babington, and we've said it. Obviously, this is where the changing the rules doesn't trigger any logic to delete responses, which what I was just discussing before. That you probably need to add that logic in. But if I change it back to the dogs survey and save, obviously there's no rules on that, so it'll just add in the two questions about dogs. But now we know we've said it must not equal A Babington. The city's irrelevant, so we can leave London there. If I change the survey about cars, now the rule is the primary contact must not be A Babington. So again, the favourite colours question should be filtered out, which it is. And we could obviously build on that and say that the city must equal London and so on and so forth. But hopefully that gives you an idea of a direction to go with sort of a generic rules engine. It's kind of hard coded with the fact that in this particular plugin, although this is a plugin registered against the account, so it's not an issue that it's hard coded, but the logic where has it gone? Where I target, it's on the query expression, where I've got this account account.logical name. That's obviously the query expression it's building is specific to the account, so it's not really taking account of the fact that this rule has a particular entity chosen. But the reason I put the entity in is so that you can retrieve the correct fields for various entities. So you can obviously manipulate this how you wish. I'll zip up the source code and I closed that too soon. I'll zip up the source code. Obviously, you guys with 2013 are going to have to test it because that document.get element by ID, I don't know if it's going to work or not. My future videos, I'm going to try to. I've built a CRM 2013 environment now. I'm going to try to move to CRM 2013 for any future requests and tutorials. And obviously, if you can do that and post what version, whether it's online or on-premise, and whether it's 2011 or 2013, that might be useful for me to get a handle on who's using what. I mean, I may even set up a poll on my forum in one of the threads. But anyway, thanks for watching again, and hopefully have some any positive or negative feedback. But cheers, bye.